Hey y'all. So today we're going to talk about troubleshooting Kibana Health. Previously, we wrote a blog that covers these steps. We just want to show today trying to induce some Kibana Health issues and then afterwards going and troubleshooting them. So for that purposes, today I spun up a quick little baby deployment. So it has two zones, Elasticsearch at 2 gigabytes with a tiebreaker, and then one Kibana instance at 1 gigabyte. So for this Kibana, if we go and open it, we can generally see that it loads, right? But the question people always have is just because it loads, how do I know it's healthy, right? So under Kibana troubleshooting, it ends up telling us, we're just gonna quick run through it healthy, and then afterwards we can go look at it unhealthy. It tells us we can go look at status under this status page. Status. Okay, so the Kibana status is green. We're on 8.14.3, somewhere in here. This is our heap, we're looking good, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so Kibana status overall is healthy, and then afterwards it's gonna have two general groups. It's gonna have core status and plugin status. So Kibana is a UI that sits on top of Elasticsearch as a database as a dependency. So if Elasticsearch is unhealthy, that's very frequently how users first notice is they come to Kibana and Kibana doesn't let them log in, or after they log in, it errors. If you come to the status page, if we like expanded this, it would say like cannot connect to Elasticsearch, right? Like something's wrong. So very first thing is if Elasticsearch is healthy. The second part is that when Kibana starts up, it's going to go do a saved object migration. Now, unless you're actually upgrading, since that migration is to transform objects during upgrade, it's basically doing a no-op, but technically it has to pass through that migration. So if a success criteria is not matched during that saved object migration, even if it's a no-op, it would induce errors. So the common example that people run into on startup is, say you closed the .kibana indices, Kibana relies on them, so it's going to fail, and in particular, it's probably going to fail near or around the saved object step of its startup process. So after those two dependencies are accounted for from the Elasticsearch side, afterwards we have the Kibana plugin side. So Kibana has a myriad of plugins. They play into each other, I guess you could say. So there's some core ones like the security plugin. The core of them all is the task manager, which I just realized is not alphabetical. Okay, so task manager is at the bottom. So this is telling us the task manager is healthy, which is awesome. So the task manager is whenever requests come to Kibana, either scheduled or on the fly, it's going to make sure that it gets them fit into the queue and actually processed. So the majority of processes that happen between Kibana and Elasticsearch, Kibana is actually delegating to Elasticsearch. Easiest example, literal search, right? Kibana's demonstrating the results under dashboard or under discover, but it is not by itself processing the search request and or containing the data. However, separate from that, there are some processes that Kibana actually runs from within itself. The core ones are Kibana runs the actual reports, like it sends out the search request to Elasticsearch, but it still is majorly involved in the actual reporting mechanism. So like under discover, uh, up here, if you say share CSV report, like this type of report behavior runs from Kibana. Secondly, if you generate rules, whether those rules are under security rules or whether those rules are under stack monitoring as rules or whether those rules are under stack management as rules. So rules created under here, rules created under here. And thirdly, when you click into stack monitoring, it usually asks you like, do you want to create the basic rules? We're just gonna say yes. Okay. So those three situations. So now we've talked about reporting, we've talked about rules. In the same spirit of rules, running from Kibana. The connector actions also run from Kibana. And then lastly, the telemetry, which is a really light process, and so we don't usually care. But telemetry also runs from Kibana. So to that extent, when we are looking at this page, sometimes you'll end up seeing like if everything ends up becoming red, if everything's red and the task manager is red, the task manager induced it. Under here, it does tell you, I guess it doesn't tell you while it's happy. Hopefully we'll see it later. Like it'll tell you like if the license is having an issue, it'll tell you like it's because I can't contact Elasticsearch or because of the task manager. And so as you open the submenus, it'll start pointing fingers, which is awesome, rather than trying to guess. So currently, Kibana is happy, right? That's exactly what we want. We're still going to go run this task manager help. Let me grab my URL and then over here. We just want to see what it looks like when it's happy. Okay, so this JSON generally tells us stats object. Under stats, we're going to see there are 4 main things that contribute to the overall status okay. Each one of these has a sub status under it, which I think says okay, degraded, and error. And so under here we see, I guess we can just start with capacity estimation. So capacity estimation, when you, open. Okay, so when you first set up Kibana, it can usually be pretty small, right? As you start adding users and or like if you go in and add in all of the pre-built rules or add in like a whole bunch of stuff to that extent, the capacity estimation may start noticing strain. Usually it'll report it under the reason. And then secondly, usually it'll tell you like the observed Kibana instances is 1. That number may be off if you're like rotating Kibana A for Kibana B. But then secondly, it'll tell you versus the proposed Kibana instances are a different figure. R2 match, which is why it says status is okay, right? So capacity estimation, we're going to try to use pre-built rules today. We're just going to go enable all of them and hope that the capacity estimation in response starts thinking that it has concerns. That as a thought should start also applying to these other 3, but let's talk about them. So configuration is saying also status okay. So if we do Kibana scaling considerations, blah, blah, blah. Awesome. Okay, so under the task manager guide, it kind of talks about our type of situation, and then it starts talking about scaling guidance. So this scaling guidance ends up talking about, like, do you need to scale horizontally, aka adding more instances of Kibana? Do you need to scale vertically, aka it's keeping up, but it like its CPU is always strained or its heap is always strained? The third option under scaling vertically is, let's say you like really beefed out its actual resources. There are 2 main settings that potentially also need changed, the max workers and the pull interval. So those show under here, max or pull interval and max workers. So if you decide to get really big Kibana instances vertically, you don't want to forget to also override these 2 settings. They are considered medium advanced, right? Like if you contact support, usually the first thing we say is like reset all the defaults and see if things are working or whatnot. But again, like it can make sense under certain circumstances, usually particularly like when you're running huge sim cases, specifically like with like cross-cluster search or something. So configuration. The next 2 are more verbose. So under workload, it also says status is okay. You're going to notice it's going to break out a couple of things for us, which are awesome. So workload in particular starts telling you about test types. We're not going to scroll through, but the thing that we start caring about between workload and runtime is that it breaks out the task types. So if the task manager in the future claims that there is a problem, it also points to what type of object is our problem or is in play. Related to that, you can come and look at the schedule. We just barely enabled a couple of rules, so we have a couple of repeating. But if, for example, I don't see 1 second. I think the lowest is 1 minute. Okay, so if, for example, you had like created a whole bunch of rules that are running extremely frequently, right? Like that obviously is going to potentially induce strain. And we would see kind of this number be extremely big. So schedule, estimated schedule density. I always look at it and then afterwards I'm not fully sure what I'm looking for. It says in the docs what you're looking for. Usually I just look for big numbers uniquely to the buckets around it. And if I find that, then I go read the docs about it. And then capacity requirements. This is helpful to compare against that configuration to overrides and your capacity estimation. So sometimes I come and check this. But the last one is the runtime. And the runtime has a whole bunch of subsections that I love. I like look at the runtime a lot. So drift by type, again, is going to point to particular objects drifting versus all of them drifting. Execution, duration does the exact same thing. So I don't necessarily care, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Hopefully this is sufficient to look at. So if you reach out to support, one of the first things that we potentially end up going and investigating is Kibana and the task manager can both potentially claim healthy, even though there is potentially a drift. And this drift can get quite high. I'll show you under Kibana issues, there is a backing philosophy on why this runtime doesn't actually induce a warning. For a lot of use cases, it can make sense. For people contacting support, usually they've like pre-filtered themselves into the situation that it doesn't make sense for them, right? So for example, like we'll see like this load is like 80 seconds behind, which means like when they're running normal requests, they're like, why do I have a lag that's, what is that, like almost a minute and a half, right? In that type of circumstance, especially because they're noticing, right? Like this would actually be problematic versus in other use cases, you can have that high of drift and it makes sense for that use case. Farther down, you can see kind of, you cannot see devs feedback on why they potentially think it makes sense. Okay, somewhere over here. Okay, so the second thing we end up caring about, when you contact support, one of the main things that flips whether the runtime says status okay or not is the load. So the load shows P5010, P9040, P9580, and P99 100. P99 and P95 being 100 in my experience is very common. Usually support looks at P90 and P50. If your P50 is at 100, I generally tell people like you're probably very definitely undersized compared to what you're expecting. If your P90 is 100, it could be that you have expensive tasks. I mean, I still usually tell people like we need to babysit it for a bit in order to know. But at this point, like ours is healthy, so we wouldn't take any action. However, what we're hoping to do by enabling all the pre-built rules is we're hoping to flag in particular that P50 creeps up much higher than 10. Okay, so we have task manager, we have status somewhere over here. Okay, so let's talk about real quick the setup that I did. So we have a small cluster. We have a small cluster on purpose. Kibana is only 1 GB. And then I also enabled logs and metrics. Enabling logs and metrics gives us stack monitoring. Enabling stack monitoring gives us the alerts. So what we want on the alerts is, in general, if Kibana started experiencing issues, blop, blop, like this type of, this message would say unhealthy. If something underlying on the Elasticsearch layer, so earlier where we saw like Kibana has dependencies on Elasticsearch and saved objects, we would just want to know like, is Elasticsearch unhealthy or is it resources experiencing utilization errors and therefore that's why Kibana's kind of in effect experiencing issues, right? So this stack monitoring, these rules cover a vast majority of the reasons people end up contacting support, thinking that it's a Kibana level issue when actually it's an Elasticsearch level issue. So just sharing that. Now that we have that and we have that stock monitoring data. We do have some data coming through. It's a fresh baby cluster, so it's not going to have most. However, whoa, I keep clicking that, trying to minimize. However, under security rules, we can still go enable pre-built rules. So the spirit of security rules is that you can install everything you want, but you should only enable what you kind of know you need. And if you enable them temporarily, figure out what's going on, and then disable them afterwards, that's fine. But each of these rules is going to come with some form of overhead cost. And so we usually don't say like, just go enable everything, right? Because everything, for example, in my test cluster, the backing indices aren't there, the data columns aren't there. This is guaranteed to potentially, like on a minute interval or 5-minute interval or 30-minute interval, just be wasting resources. For our use case though, it potentially, because I made the Kibana node so small, it's a good bet for us to try to induce a Kibana health problem in order to demonstrate it. So we're going to enable those elastic rules. When they enable, afterwards, oh, go back to installed. Okay. Afterwards, I want to enable them. Select all, enable. Awesome. Okay, I need to pivot us back to our blog. So hopefully once we enable this, we're going to give it a couple minutes to run, but let's go see kind of what that blog's telling us to read through. So we have checked the overall status. Where we came from, it was healthy. Where we're going to, hopefully it's not going to be healthy, just so that we can demonstrate it. But under here, I think it just tells us the same thing we just talked through. So it tells us go check those status core, afterwards go check those plugins. Afterwards, I highlight the plugins that I think matter the most, the ones that like cascade the most into the other ones working or not. The two that we haven't discussed yet. So the task manager potentially can be healthy or not. And then on top of that, the other two plugins for sim rules and normal Kibana rules in general that we're going to care about are rule registry and alerting. So the example on that is like say your .kibana indices are healthy, and then the sim rules write to the .internal.alerts index. If you close one of those indices, you are going to hurt your rule registry plugin, right? But the task manager could still be healthy. So again, just highlighting like there's a couple of plugins that play in pretty frequently that basically just highlight like something happened on the Elasticsearch layer that you need to go take a look at. Okay, checking task manager, we talked about that. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so somewhere around here is where we've gotten to. So hopefully we're about to induce this same situation, which we'll check live together. But what I had done last time when I was trying to do this is I was trying to like induce that same capacity by enabling a whole bunch of rules. I think when I had done it, I had also enabled like had forced the rule to be extremely heavy. We're gonna see what we ended up doing today. So, oh, zoom out. Oh, it is zoomed out. Okay, so let's just refresh and see our status. Our status is still green. Plugin's still healthy, obviously then. Awesome. Heap is about the same, I think. Okay, and then let's go check our task manager. So task manager status is still okay. The runtime. So our drift just went from, I think, max 8 seconds up to 26 seconds, right? So yeah, we got to P5100 already. Oh, yes. I love when I can induce this easily. Troubleshooting videos don't always go this way. Okay, we did it-ish. So you'll notice the status still says okay though. Part of that is because Kibana does not necessarily fully know yet that they're going to be repeat tasks, so its capacity estimation is waiting on this message to be considered permanent. in my experience, that takes like 5 minutes, right? Because it's trying to account for blips, right? Like if I run a report, that's an asynchronous task that causes a blip, but then everything heals and nobody needs to be notified. However, this eventually should flag off of OK. Once it flags off of OK, we're going to induce our issue. Okay, at this point, I want to add in a second graphic, support diagnostics. So under support diagnostics, we can run a Kibana diagnostic. We're just going to run that really quick. It's going to pull the same two APIs that we have been discussing. I just want to start capturing a point in time so that we can see how Kibana was over time. Because I didn't capture it when it was healthy. I want to capture it when it's grumpy. Okay, so this is just pulling a quick diagnostic for Kibana for us. And then its outputted files are going to include the status, the task manager, and then it's going to have like the list of rules that I enabled. So it's like 1,200 rules, so it's going to take it a couple minutes to run. Okay, I guess I should refresh this page. So status is still thinking it's okay. We'll get there. To be fair, yeah, we're up to 49 now. I was like, I'm not actually gonna wait for it to error just to show this. Okay. So at this point, usually somebody would contact, where am I? Usually at this point, somebody would contact support and they'd be like, hey, like my Discover UI is taking a long time to load. What I just showed, it did not take a long time to load, right? And usually at that point, like uh, as support would normally start with this guide that just goes over like my Discover's taking a long time to load. Like, let's go and see, like, is it the data view loading? Is it the load fills API loading? Or like, is it the actual search that Elasticsearch would be loading? A precursor to even trying this guide, right, is Kibana healthy, period. And so usually when people reach out to me and they're like, Kibana's unhealthy, support's always like, send me a diagnostic, right? And then afterwards, I'm just running like a short version of that diagnostic, which is telling us the same thing as that blog. So it's telling us the overall status is okay. Other things are still flagged as okay because it hasn't been long enough, but the runtime sitting at 43 seconds and the P50 is 100. So at this point, I also link people that scale up guide that if your CPU and heap, or CPU? Okay. Blah, blah, blah. So this is heap. So if your heap was extremely elevated, 84% is not necessarily bad. But like, let's say your heap was 100, then I'd tell people like, you definitely need to vertically scale resources and or horizontally scale Kibana. However, some people, especially in Kubernetes, can give themselves extremely high resources. And then afterwards, like your heap will be like 10 and you'll still be experiencing drift because you haven't overdone, I don't know, these two default settings, right? However, noting, again, they're advanced settings because overriding them can by themselves also throw off what the task manager is reporting and make it potentially think it's unhealthy. Okay, so Kibana is available, Elasticsearch is available, Task Manager is available. We know why. Let's get rid of these. Let's get rid of, no, I still want that. I want to know if it ever flags off of okay. What I sometimes can flip. Okay. Let me show you a different way. What I sometimes can flip in order to get is hot timestamps. Something in that ballpark. not remembering. Future task manager, hot stamps. Hot. Oh, okay. Task manager, Kibana log. Okay, so the task manager logs and also separately that task manager output that I keep kind of checking. Eventually, the task manager plugin would flip to degraded and it would say it's degraded, but the end of that message is going to say, so it's trying to, the task manager does a check of its, I don't know what hot means, but of its timestamps. And if they lag too far behind a certain time frame, it starts airing this message, which should eventually show in the task manager output. And at that point, that's partially what flips the capacity to start saying that you're under a proposed amount of capacity. So this, as a message, is like very frequently what people end up raising to support, right? Like the task manager started airing this message. What does that message mean? Which is why we added it into the docs. Ours isn't saying it yet. Either I need to enable more rules, or just give it enough time and it eventually would. I'm not going to wait though. So if this situation happened live, usually under rules, we would tell them like, you need to take a hard look at which rules you actually need and which rules you don't need. If you need those rules, if you're in the middle of an outage, you need to consider just like throwing hardware at the problem and then handling the software problem later. Also in that same spirit, like again, where we checked resources versus capacity throughput, like if your resources are good and your capacity throughput's not good, you need to consider those advanced setting overrides. For our purposes, I broke it on purpose. So let's just go bulk disable. Now, that's going to disable all the SIM rules. It's not going to disable my stack monitoring rules, right? So the alerting framework has rules for each of the solutions and just for like some of the basic Kibana rules. So we're going to disable these here, and then afterwards, nope. And I thought I had another tab. Afterwards, under stack management, we're going to see that some rules are still going to be enabled. And then those rules are going to be ones not related to SIM. Okay. Perfect. So most of these errors, I'm pretty confident are going to be because I like enabled basic stuff that doesn't deal with anything, right? It's going to be like the expected index doesn't exist or the expected column doesn't exist. Not action type. What do I want? Rule state, rule is enabled. Ooh. Okay. So here's where we see our stack monitoring stuff is still enabled, which is awesome. Okay. Let me think. How long do I need to give this to recover? Not claim duration, drift. Okay, so the first drift is starting to come down, but it has not come down by much yet. Yeah, our P load is still 100. I think it finished disabling. Let's find out. Oh, perfect. The other way you potentially, oh, deprecated it so we can't, or not deprecated, I disabled it so I can't see it. Blah, blah, blah. The other way you can potentially see this, if it comes down to not rule quantity, but rule quality, usually you come under these columns and it starts telling you about indexing alerts. Usually it's the query alert. And so you like filter on this column, like this is the rule taking the longest to run. I think that's milliseconds or seconds. Milliseconds. Yeah. So 407 milliseconds is not concerning. But like, for example, like we frequently have the very first one takes multiple minutes and then everybody else is like seconds or milliseconds only. Okay. While this recovers, so we didn't fully show this. We got close to it. This is generally what it would say under that capacity estimation, is that it's observed versus proposed. Kibana instances would be 1 versus 2, however bad you did it. This ends up talking about scaling. As we recover it, this is the same thing that we're currently waiting for ours to like recognize that things are getting better. And then if you needed to investigate particular subrules, that sim rule monitoring or rule history is excellent. The second one is if it ends up not being related to sim, this is when you'd, under the task manager help, start looking at like, was it a machine learning rule or was it a query rule, and just kind of isolate in further from there. The rest of this blog ends up talking about you can, somewhere under here, you can actually just like pull the rule history in order to find your most expensive rules. If you need to do it agnostic to the security rule monitoring tab and like check all of your rules, we're not going to do that today because I just mass enabled everything. So that should be the end of it. Kibana should be coming healthy again. I don't know which tab I'm trying to find. You. Okay. So Kibana should be coming healthy again. It's not you. It's not you. It's this one. So it should still be green. Elasticsearch and saved objects should still be good. Yeah. So we're still green. Let's refresh this and see. Yeah, so we're like way back down, which is awesome. So our P50 drift is back down to 2 to 3 seconds, and our P50 is 80. So it looks like it's just having that lag. Again, it's back on its way to healthy, which is awesome for us. If, let's say, hypothetically, we ended up deciding that we wanted to override those advanced settings. In Elastic Cloud, we would need to see resource, runtime settings, task manager settings. Okay. We would need to go look at poll interval and max workers. So if we had wanted to, do I not have open cloud, please? Manage. Under edit, we'd be scrolling down to Kibana. I'm trying to remember if this is a user accessible setting or if you have to ask support, but I don't remember, so we're gonna find out together once I have valid YAML. So A defaults to 3000. So let's just set 2000. Okay. So we'd override poll interval and then also max workers. When I go to hit save, it's going to give me a confirmation window, which is also how I'd know if it tells me if I have permission issues as a user or not. So awesome. So I could hit confirm. I'm just going to hit confirm so that we can see it's going to kick off a plan change. That plan change is majorly affecting Kibana. It's going to take us to the deployment activity. So it's overriding that. Again, for Elastic Cloud, like they do really well at lining up resource to capacity. So usually support is going to tell you to horizontally or vertically scale. But again, right, like the settings are available and it is a best judgment call based on use case, right? So the options are there in order to do, and this is exactly how you would do it on Elastic Cloud if it came to it. Awesome. Okay, so at this point, we had a healthy Kibana, we broke it, we saw it, we fixed it. Go team. Thanks all for hanging out.